So today, on our excerpt of A Story of a Breatharian Warrior, let us continue. This lifestyle takes years of hard work and dedication. You don't just wake up one day and say you're a Breatharian. And to me, that's the impression that a lot of people give. Another pet peeve is how much cleansing and detox history do we know of any of these people themselves. To my knowledge, none of them talk about how they got to their final destination, what issues they had to deal with, and how they overcame them. We know nothing about these people except that they talk a good game about prana and living on light. My answer to this million-dollar question as to why we eat is, well, what else is there to do? It's a form of escapism and brings most people pleasure and comfort. To me, boredom is one of the main and most overlooked reasons for eating. If you really look at your eating habits, you will probably be able to trace all your reasons for eating to boredom. To me, it's as simple as this. At the dawn of time, we ate. We liked. We got hooked. We kept on doing it. To me, it's that simple. People will say that it's all about nutrition. But if that was the case, why have all the flavoring in their food? Why have all the flavoring in your food? Why spend so much time in the kitchen making up concoctions with all kinds of herbs and spices, etc.? Why not just live off vitamins and supplements and pills? If it was just down to nutrition, then wouldn't it make more sense to get the nutrition straight from the source and eat more natural foods like fruits and veggies instead of donuts or pizza? We have become so accustomed to seeing man-made foods as the norm that we become experts at justifying its consumption regardless of all the sickness and disease it causes. One thing I learned early on as a Breatharian was that I had so much more time on my hands. This brought on a whole new anxiety because now, as the days went on, it was like time was standing still, and the days would seem to go on forever. For a while, it was hard to understand and deal with. I even began to fear waking up in the morning because it meant enduring the longer days and nights. Yes, I say nights, because I was also not sleeping very much, which meant that time seemed to go even slower and the days seemed even longer. Many times, I felt like just running into the nearest fast food joint, stuffing myself until I could no longer feel being self or any emotion. It was dealing with this situation that I saw firsthand the reasons why I eat. This led me to watch wild and domesticated animals that had no purpose, to see how they dealt with their time. Well, what did the animals do? Absolutely nothing. And they were happy to do so. They were happy with it too. I saw that most animals didn't look for something to do like we humans do. They don't get stressed out by being alone by themselves either. We humans seem to have a fear of doing nothing, and an even bigger fear of being by ourselves. We drive ourselves frantic, trying to occupy ourselves, and if we cannot find anything to do, then we resort to eating. And I think that this is why everyone's social life revolves around food. I came to face with this when I went Breatharian, and before that, I never even thought about it. People had always asked me why humans and animals eat if Breatharianism was a possibility. And I had always put it down to altered states of our emotions. I had always put it down to food addiction, But now I feel that everything is down to altered states of our emotions. I believe that we have experienced pleasures that have interfered with our emotional state, such as drinking, eating, sex, that we have become emotionally attached to. And this is something that the food industry, for example, takes full advantage of. But like I say, this goes for raw foods too, not just processed. Ultimately, it comes down to us waking up to get back into control. So it's interesting when he talks about the industry. I remember watching a documentary where they were talking about how so many millions of dollars are spent. And I actually read this in a book as well, a book they have here at Barnes & Noble's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a book by creating more beneficial habitual routines for yourself. But they talk about how the food industry spends millions and millions and millions of dollars to engineer just the right amount of salty or, just the right amount of flavor or just the right amount of crunch with a potato chip, or to engineer just the right amount of gooiness and crunchiness in a cookie, right? Gooiness and chewiness, right? They just the right amount. And they will even hire in neuroscientists to come and test out their experiments in the lab. And they will put like a dab of sauce or a dab of a tincture of something from the chip or something from the food product on someone's tongue. And they will look at the brain, and the neuroscientists will study the brain, and they hire these people to see just what they call the bliss point. They call it the bliss point, where the brain will hit this point of euphoric bliss, and whatever that point is, whatever that potato chip got them to that point, they say, that's the one. Ship that one out. We need that one. Put that one on the shelves, right? And so our grocery stores will be stocked with these modern day drugs, but we are the test subjects. We're the guinea pigs, right? Just like I was back when I was eating Slim Jims, salt and vinegar chips, and all sorts of yummy goodies, right? The Skittles, the M&Ms, the fruit roll-ups, and everything else, right? And it's no wonder that it was hard to put it down. It's hard to let go of an addiction that you don't even know you have. People that speak about being healthy talk as if only fast foods and animal products are bad for you and everything else is okay. This way of thinking makes no sense to me at all. To me, anything you put in your body can be questionable. When people find out I'm a breatharian, the first question they always ask is, well, don't you ever get hungry? That's the time I take a deep breath and ask if they want the long explanation or the long version. I found that the answer to this question is not so clear-cut as you might think, because if I give them the short answer and say no, then they always ask, why not? And there's many reasons why people may feel the sensation of hunger, but a lot of it comes down to what you put inside your body. For instance, there's allergic reactions to certain ingredients in processed foods. Plus, if you put addictive foods in, you're going to get cravings for more when they are on their way out. Also, depending on the condition of your guts, if you're eating solid food, you'll have a buildup of partially digested, undigested, toxic debris and waste from food that you ate days or even weeks ago, moving around in your intestines. Also, I believe that a lot of what we see as true hunger is actually organ, stomach, intestinal shrinkage. I say this because when we eat cooked foods, we eat large portions that we are stretching and inflaming our organs. So when we get rid of the waste and debris, we create space in the stomach. So naturally, the stomach wants to shrink back to its natural size at all times because it's already being stretched. But what we have been taught to do is to stop the stomach from shrinking or the feelings of hunger by eating more and more and more food, which in effect stops the stomach from shrinking and expands the stomach again, thus keeping the hunger cycle going. Now, I can definitely speak on this part of partially digested and undigested toxic debris. You know, it's funny how even after I had gone liquid the first month when I took what they call a solid food vacation, that first month going without food and being on liquids, solid matter was still coming out of my body. And it was alarming to me that I wasn't putting anything solid inside, but a lot of solid was still coming outside. So I was scratching my head. I was puzzled because I was like, wait a minute, this is perplexing. Like, this is very vexing. Wait a minute. I used to think that what I ate that day would come out that day. But then it started making me believe when I was looking in the restroom that, wait a minute, was this days ago? Was this weeks ago? Like, what is actually happening? Like, what is my digestive system actually doing? Like, is it actually able to process all these things, or has it been so backed up? Am I like, 15, 16, 17, 18 meals backed up? Like, that all this stuff is still coming out? I remember I went to get a colonic, and I went to get hydrocolon therapy, and, they have this little machine where you administer it yourself. The place I went to, they didn't have to do it for me. I did it myself. But when I was looking in the tube that was right next to me, that I was laying on this table, I was watching all of this solid matter coming out of my body, and my eyes were like, what is that? Like, all of this stuff was just coming out, and I had been on liquids. So I was like, what the heck is that? Right? Like, what is that? So we just don't know how much the body is actually storing. We just keep pouring, we just keep feeding, we just keep putting it in. But we have no idea how much is actually coming out. So it's an interesting question. Due to the addictive nature of cooked foods and this false notion of hunger, it's the drug of choice for many. Thankfully, I finally reached a point where I am past needing to use food as a security blanket. But I'm not going to lie to you. In the beginning, getting my head around the thought of letting go of randomly eating cooked and raw food was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It took years to ignore the fake signs that were telling me that it was time to eat. Believe me, when your stomach is growling and your addicted mind is screaming out for its next fix, it's hard to think outside yourself and know what's really going on, because as children, we have all been taught that these are signs that we are hungry and that we should eat because eating is good for us. Well, my opinion is that it's not true hunger. I found that for me, it was all based on me consistently using food to numb the hunger, suppress stressful emotions, and as a means of escapism, and the hunger wasn't even real. Now, I definitely resonate with Brother Jericho Sunfire as he says that, because the more and more I went without, and the longer and longer I went through detox, through dry periods, even the longest period that I went just with nothing at all, no food, no water, I realized that my hunger was an illusion. Like what he's saying, I realized that as well. I was like, wait a minute, what was I actually feeling if I'm still alive and I haven't eaten for days. Like, what was that? Was that actually hunger? Like that rumbling in my stomach, what was that? And I remember Tom, his explanation was the toxicity moving around, or just the digestive system doing whatever. Jericho is saying that it's the stomach shrinking back, or attempting to shrink back before we fill it up again. And so many people have different explanations, but one thing that I will definitely agree is, I don't think that's hunger. I think that we've labeled it hunger, and it keeps us in the cycle. But if we went long enough without it, and we didn't label it as that, if we just thought, maybe that's just the body doing something that I don't even know what it's doing, you start to see that the sensation passes after a while. It's kind of like meditation when you sit down and you're trying not to think about all these thoughts. They're coming to you in your mind like a tornado of thoughts, just terrorizing you. Negative thoughts, positive thoughts, distracting thoughts, redacting thoughts, right? But if you just sit, if you just stay there, usually they pass by like clouds in the sky, you know? You don't have to let the bird make a nest on your head. You can let it pass. You can let it keep going. Kind of like the painful sensation when we would do Vipassana. We did a 10-day Vipassana where we sat for 10 hours a day for 10 days. And the meditation instructors would ask us, you know, how are the sensations? What are the sensations? And some people would say, oh, it's just excruciating pain. It's unbearable. I can't stand it. My legs feel like they're going to break, like they're going to snap like twigs. And the teacher would be like, okay, just realize that, you know, this too shall pass. It won't be like that always. And the next person he'd ask, how are the sensations? Right? And they'd say the opposite. Oh, I feel so blissful. I feel euphoric. I feel heavenly. You know, I love the sensations. And the meditation teacher would caution. They would say, okay, just this will also change, right? Don't get caught up in the bliss. Don't get caught up in the pain. Understand it's impermanent. This too will change. So with that hunger feeling, if you don't try to stave it off, if you don't try to plug it up, if you don't try to fill it up like we usually do, it changes. And you start to see that, oh, I don't feel hungry anymore. I don't have those pangs anymore. I don't have those feelings anymore. I don't have those cravings anymore. It's just, where did they go? Right? So that's why we let people know in the beginning, just take it slow. You know? 'Cause there's a lot more that we're dealing with. We're dealing with our emotions, our mind. We're dealing with so many things that we find. Once you get rid of the emotional attachments and what waste is in your gut, then the feelings of hunger will soon disappear for good. But instead, we put more in to feed the desire and stop the feeling. Now, this is very good too, because that was actually one of the most conflicting things for me. When hunger, or my sensation that I labeled hunger, when that completely disappeared and dissipated, it was like I was in between a rock and a hard place, because I was around so many different people who were all eating. I was around homeless people in downtown Los Angeles that were begging for food. And then here I was in between, and I didn't need any of it. And I was going crazy. I was losing my mind, because I was like, am I the only one that knows we don't need any of it? Like, am I really going crazy right now? I don't feel hungry. I don't even want to eat food. I don't need to eat it. But I don't even feel hungry. And then when I finally did eat after that, when I did go back to solids during that period, there was a feeling of nothing happened. There was no payoff. It's like it just went in my body and just burst into flames. It was like it went into a bottomless pit, an abyss. It was like, I don't know what happened. It was like there was no full feeling, that feeling that you want to feel, like, oh, you know, that feeling after a good meal, that you feel that your stomach is distended, it's expanded and you feel, oh, I couldn't possibly have anything else. No, it was dangerous because I could have whatever I want and it didn't feel like I ate anything. I feel like I ate nothing, like I ate air. And I was like, wait a minute, this is conflicting. This is very confusing. So that was a period of my life that I had to go through as well, where the payoff wasn't even there anymore. Like my body had changed in such a way that I didn't even respond to it the same way. Like maybe, I don't know, I don't even know how to theorize it, but whatever digestive fluids or whatever things that my body was doing before, it wasn't doing it on the same level. And it had adjusted to receiving nourishment from other sources. So it was almost asking me like, what are we going back there for? Like, why are you doing that again? Haven't we moved on? So it was really the mind. The mind was the barrier at that point. The belief was the barrier to entry. It was hard work in the beginning as a fruitarian because I didn't know the dynamics, but getting away from the illusion of hunger was vital. And I cleaned out a bunch of debris and stopped putting food into my body. I was finally getting the break from having to digest the continuous supply of meals and snacks that I was eating. I loved it. I always felt stronger and clearer, both mentally and physically, when I stopped eating solid food. Many people think that the basis of Breatharianism is all about getting off of food, but for me, that was not the case. For me, liquids were the last to go. Getting off of water and beating my emotional conditioning was always my downfall, and to be honest, a real source of anxiety. But I had been messing with the idea on previous attempts, and seeing as though I had always ended up in extremely hot climates, I figured I had really got my work cut out for me. It was my theory that it all came down to conditioning, meaning that when you work out in the sun, the first thing you want afterwards is an ice cold drink because you would be so hot. Well, to me, as a former sportsman myself, I already knew that to really cool yourself down in a hot climate, you would end up with a stomach the size of a basketball, and then some. And this is what I was experiencing for myself. I also experienced greed, too, in situations like that. I would overdrink, especially on fruit juice. Well, as time went on, I realized that if it was really about keeping cool, you would need to jump in a cold bath to get the whole body cooled down, and to my mind, that should eliminate the need to guzzle down so much water and liquid. Well, for me, it worked as a treat, and I still use this method now. It also made me think that maybe that is why I have been so drawn to the sea. We have gone so far from nature that we think that air conditioning is naturally the way to cool off, and we have forgotten the real wave. Now I look at water in a different way now. One of the tricks I learned was to get a life and be happy in it. I love music and laughing, so I can relate. So I surround myself with those opportunities at all times. I fought the calling to go Breatharian for years. I think mostly in part because I was not ready, and partly because a part of me was living in fear of that very moment when I was mentally ready to let go of the consumption of food and liquids. This other part of me, I have yet to find the words to describe, but I can only refer to it as my darker side. Because I had to really fight through the extreme fear and anxiety of completely letting go. This fear or negative emotional force did not seem to come from me at all. It was like it was coming from another person, hiding inside of me, that had been comfortable hiding in me all those years, feeding off my insane cooked food diet. with all the sweet sensations that came with it. And now it was going to raise hell, because all that was going to come to an end. It would have been so easy to sit smugly in my high seat and blame it all on industries and their attempts to keep the masses hooked on their products. But I had the same experience on fruits and juice years before, where the focus would be shifted to the next sweet and pleasurable sensation. And like I have always said for years, the mind is always one step ahead of you and knows exactly when and where to strike, because it knows how you think and will do anything it has to do to get the fix it needs. And in the end, I realized that I was simply feeding my own emotions. I also believe that the emotional part is much, much stronger than the addictive ingredients in the food industries that they put in their products. Many times, I caught myself back talking myself in my head and realized I was pretty much up against a mighty warrior in myself and would have to detach from this darker emotional side in order to keep my sanity and to be able to see fact from lie. I basically had to take myself out of the game and lock myself away from any stores or kind people that may give or offer me food. People offer me food all the time. I was writing my book and people would come up and offer me food. Because I knew that going breatharian was what I dreamt about being, but that dream was being corrupted by the darker side of me, and I knew this side had to be brought down. This is how I approached it. I am sure there is a scientific term or explanation, but this was my street layman approach. This was war, and trust me, it was. I drew from years of experience with Breatharianism, and I had to really dig down deep to beat it. It was like somebody very angry was inside me, trying to control me with all their might to get what they wanted. And when they used every trick in the book, they simply gave up and left, without any fuss or bother. I felt very much like somehow I had been used simply as a vessel to please or to feed someone else's wants and desires. But at the end of the day, I was using myself. I was using foods and liquids and any kind of pleasurable sensation to self-medicate myself. I had done this for years. I was the king of comfort eating, and this was the last thing to be if I was to follow the path of a breatharian. I had to control my emotional state and not let outside influence take control of it, like foods, etc., which is pretty much what the rest of society does. At this point, it was actually easy once I had worked it out. I just had to constantly remind myself what the situation was and make sure I stayed true to myself. One of the biggest, yet most subtle realizations I had to come to terms with was the boredom that comes with transitioning completely to a breatharian lifestyle. This was a tricky one to deal with because it was hard to even realize what the issues were or that it was even boredom that I was trying to avoid. But when I had to question if I was really bored or was I simply avoiding being with myself, which I think was more the case. Now this reminds me of a quote by a famous mathematician. His name was Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal, and he said, all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit by ourselves in a room alone. And I thought this was very interesting because he didn't say like some of humanity's problems. He didn't say like a few of humanity's problems. No. He was very specific. He said all of humanity's problems stem from that one thing, that inability just to sit by ourselves in a room alone. Now, how many of us can say that we can do that? Before we go crazy, before we have to do something, we have to be something, we have to say something, we have to hear something, we have to taste something, we have to eat something, we have to... How many of us can do that? And when I asked myself the same question, there were times in my life where I literally could not do that. I literally could not just sit down and do nothing. Like, that was one of the most awkward things. And Osho talks about it as well, just like the fact that people just don't know how to be with themselves, don't know how to live with themselves, and that we do a lot of things to escape and to try and run away from ourselves, but everywhere we go, there we are, right? You look in the mirror, you haven't gone far. So if we're not up to par, and if we don't feel ourselves, can we really escape to anywhere else? That is the question. That is the question. I found that avoid being with myself. I found that I have so much more time on my hands, and in the beginning stages of Breatharianism, it's very difficult to know how to deal with it or what to make of it. I would really struggle at times because I was a huge comfort eater back in the day, and it was really hard to control my emotions, but I found that it was useless trying to control them. Things worked better when I would simply allow myself to do what I wanted to do until I reached the point where I was ready to let go of the emotional attachments I had remaining. I found this worked very well for me and for the Breatharian stage. Now, I definitely resonate with what Brother Jericho Sunfire is saying right there, because just like Elitam said, you know, with the avocados and Fritos, that he thought he would never be free of them. You know, he thought that he would never, ever stop eating them. And for me, it was the same with sushi, was the same with so many different dishes. Like, I had so many different wishes to be free of things, but I had to let it run its course, you know. There was even a short little period where I was trying a method that did not work for me. It completely did not work. And it was the chewing something and spitting out method. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I ended up taking like little trays of broccoli. I would buy little trays of broccoli at grocery stores, and I would put soya sauce on the broccoli, because I used to eat a lot of Chinese food back in the day, you know, like all sorts of different things. Like, but I would put soya sauce on broccoli, and I was just chewing it and spitting it out, and I would look at the container after I was done, and it would just be so depressing. It would be so depressing, just looking at all these bits and pieces of chewed up broccoli and soya sauce, like in this container. Like, Jerome, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing? Why are you chewing? Why are you doing this to yourself? And the craving, you know, it wasn't going away. It had to run its course. So it was the emotions, the emotional eating, the emotional stimulation, and the overall sensations that had to take a vacation, right? And when I got tired of that, you know, and I rewired that, it took a staycation. It finally left, and I was back with the breath. You know, I could breathe again. I could walk by the broccoli, and it wasn't pulling me. I could walk by, you know, different sections in the store. They weren't pulling at me like they were before. So then I was like, okay, now I can explore. Now I can see what there is more, right? So, yeah, a lot of different things had to run their course, kind of like a kid playing with a toy, you know. They're going to keep crying if you don't let them play with the toy, but once they played with it enough, they're bored of it, they're done. That's what I did with certain food items, that I just kind of had the same one. The next day I would buy the same thing. The next day I would buy the same broccoli, buy the same broccoli, buy the same broccoli, and then it was just like, I'm done, I'm tired of this. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. It's a madhouse, right? It's madness. So, yeah, it had to run its course. I also saw this anxiety in others, but I saw it disguised as hunger. People would say to me that it's impossible to live without meat or man-made processed food. But I feel that this is anxiety speaking and not actually experience. One of my favorite pastimes is asking people that eat cooked food how they would feel if I told them that from this moment onwards, they were never going to eat cooked food again. And I literally have to duck from a flying fist. Such is the anxiety and fear that springs to mind. People are so afraid of being with themselves or going within themselves and use foods to create an alter ego and hide behind that creation. And the thought of taking away that shield sends the strongest running for the hills. Wow, think about that. He says food is a shield. And if we can't hide behind food, where do we go? Some create the alter ego of being the family drunk or the family dustbin and joker like I was. I would eat everything I could get into my mouth and be the comedian, laughing and joking at the same time. This was good for me because it covered the reason why I was eating so much in the first place, which was to escape my crappy, painful existence and emotions. Heck, I didn't even realize I had chosen to self-medicate myself with food. All I knew was that I loved to eat food because eating it made me feel good for that moment. So I never had an eating disorder. I simply chose food as a way to pleasure myself. Still, to this day, I'm amazed at why nobody thought it was odd to be constantly eating, but saying that it was also seen as a macho thing, to eat till your belly was full. You've heard that. Eating fruits and salads was seen as a sign of weakness because they were not even considered food. Yeah, I remember. I remember one of my previous partners, her brother, big guy, big swole guy, he was saying, what are you eating, that rabbit food? You're eating bunny food, right? You're eating carrots and celery, like, what is this? And then when we weren't even, when neither one of us was eating solids, when we were eating like liquids, he was like, now you're eating baby food, right? What are you eating, Gerber now? You're eating baby food now? So he was the type of guy that's, you know, all about beef and rotisserie chicken, you know, food for a man, right? Be a man. So I can resonate what he's talking about, like fruits and salads usually are seen as a sign of weakness to certain people, and they're not even considered food to some people. I wasn't into all of that because I naturally just wanted to use food as my defense and my self-medication. I had a muscular physique and worked out, so I had all the excuses to eat. Depending on your social circles and family dynamics, you will see how friends and family try to fill every minute or available time eating or drinking something to escape from being alone with themselves or dealing with situations. I even remember hearing, they were saying that one of my good friends, she was hanging out with some folks and they were fruitarians, so they only eat fruit. But she was amazed. She was amazed that all they could talk about was fruit. Like there was no talk about anything else. It was like that was the only topic of conversation. Like as soon as they got their fruit and as soon as they ate it, they were like, okay, where else are we gonna go? Let's get some more. Okay, let's get some more. Okay, where are we gonna get the next batch? Right? Where are we gonna get the next batch? It was all about fruit. And she was like, wait a minute. Like I thought we left this, you know? So she realized, wait, it's not even the fruit. It's not no. It's the mind. She was like, it's the mind, it's not the fruit. It's the mind that can't stop eating, that can't stop feeding. It's the mind. So she realized it's just like an alcoholic looking for the next drink, or, you know, like a smoker looking for the next cigarette, or, a heroin addict looking for the next fix or looking for the next kick, right? She was like, it's the mind. And I remember, I'll never forget the way she expressed it. She was like, it's the human mind, the human mind. I was like, she just made me smile. But she was running her own analysis, just being around people who were obsessed, with fruit of all things. So we feel like the fruit is the healer, but, the mind is the revealer. Every minute or available time, eating or drinking, we fill all of our time. I too had anxieties about being with myself, but soon realized that I had to release my fear and accept my alone time as being a good thing. Finding solace in your own solitude, that's a big one. Like, to be able to be alone without being lonely, I kind of feel like I have a little advantage because I grew up an only child. I didn't have siblings. I didn't have anybody. So I had to get creative, playing with sticks in the backyard and, running around, bicycling through the neighborhood and just spending a lot of time by myself. So I'm pretty comfortable alone. I seem very social on here, but I spend the majority of, probably 95% of my day, just me. As I've said before, our social structure revolves completely around food, and to take it away will simply leave you with seemingly nothing to do. And that thought scares the living daylights out of people. So too, still stay in our society. So to still stay in our society and do what you want to do, you must have a warrior mentality, because you will have to break the cycle completely of being a follower or trying to please others so you do not get harassed, made fun of, or seen to be elitist. It can be extremely awkward as a breatharian when it comes to trying to live a regular life in mainstream society, because you will be constantly reminded of what you are doing, and you will be constantly reminded how much of a struggle it must be to do what you are doing, and even how impossible it is to do what you are doing. I'm only chuckling because he's hitting everything on the head. Like, the magician, understands what's behind the curtain, right? It's the crowd that's amazed, right? The magician pulls the rabbit out of the hat, he pulls the bird flies away across the stage. They're like, where did the bird come from, right? He saws the lady in half, he puts her back together. They're like, how in the world did you do that? But he understands how the trick is done. So it's kind of like what he's saying, a person living a breatharian lifestyle, you get to a point where you get it. Like, it's actually not a big deal anymore. Like, not eating, it's really not a big deal, but it's everyone else that thinks that it is. So they're all looking at you like, how are you doing that? Like, why aren't you chewing that? How are you doing that? You're just like, this is my life. They're blinking twice, right? They don't understand. So it's kind of like a magician that understands what's going on. It took a long while but I eventually realized that it wasn't good for me to stay in mainstream society, and I could finally see why people that had success with Breatharianism went into seclusion, lived in caves, forests, etc. Now, I think that there's way more people not eating than we think. It's just that a few people are actually vocal. Like a few people like Ellie Tom, people like Ray, people like, Christiana, people like Jasmuheen, people like the people that came out and talked about it are very few. But the people actually living like this, I think there's a lot. Like, actually a lot. They're just not vocal, whether they're shy or whether they just don't care. They have nothing to prove. Why? Why tell somebody you don't eat when you have nothing to prove, right? There's nothing to lose. So, just like I don't, I meet people all the time. I don't tell them. They don't know. Nobody knows, and nobody would ever guess. They would never guess, never in a million years, right? So why even bring it up as a topic of conversation? So I definitely see what he's saying, that most people, they would go into seclusion or maybe lived in caves or forests because being around mainstream society is kind of like, it could feel like a burden to some people. I used to mock those guys and say that they lived a useless existence, but now I can see why it is vital to preserve your progression. I'm not going to lock myself in a cupboard or live in a cave in Tibet, but I have realized that I will need to go to a place far away and deal with people and their questions differently and from a distance. I found that the only times I came anywhere close to thinking about wanting to eat after I had completely transitioned to Breatharianism was when I was around people with lower levels, was around people with different levels of consciousness that ate cooked food when I traveled and visited very old, close friends and family, or if people came to visit me because they would constantly be thinking and arranging their days around food and where to get their next fix or next treat. So we just talked about that. I found that the reason for this was because something emotional that wasn't resolved inside me wanted to go back and revisit the emotions, the textures, the sights and sounds of the good old days. Either of when I used to spend time with those particular people, or when I thought back to the certain funny ways I used to eat cooked food when I was a kid. But once on my own and left to my own routine, I had no such desires or thoughts about food. But for some reason, I never made that connection until late. Maybe because I was so intent on not being that guy that lives in a cave to get away from people and their various habits and energies. For instance, when you are spending hours with friends out on the town or family, at a family get-together, and everybody is downing the beers and stuffing food down their necks and demanding that you stop being silly and let your hair down. Now, I would be a liar if I said that at some point I wasn't sorely tempted and didn't start to think back to the old days and start wanting to revisit them and get stuck in with the rest of the family, eating and drinking till I was ready to pop.
Are you guys leaving?
It has been very hard to deal with this, and I have been very stubborn about getting away from temptation in the name of living a normal life. Normal life. But now I realize that I cannot stay in the social mainstream like I once thought, and that I will have to limit the time spent with people in order to protect my train of thought or mindset. I just cannot be with people that eat cooked food on a regular basis. Just like a former alcoholic or cigarette smoker cannot be around heavy drinkers and smokers, but I can handle it in very small doses, partly because the idea of being tied to eating all the time bores me to tears, and mostly because I have to protect my mindset so the idea of eating doesn't go back to seeming normal again. Now, this is a tightrope, that you balance on for sure. And I tell people, like, if you haven't been in the wavelength or in the frequency of food freedom for a while, being around others who are constantly consuming can definitely be mentally taxing. Like everyone's eating, they're all just relaxing. You are not eating, so it's mentally taxing, right? You start to feel that sense of FOMO, that fear of missing out, like what am I missing out on? The flavors, the taste, the textures, the memory. The body has all that memory, right? The subconscious mind, it doesn't forget anything. You remember, you know what that tastes like, right? But I've gotten to the point now where it's easy for me to be around people who are eating, especially family members, friends, and loved ones. And it's harder for them to be around me, which is very interesting. I wrote this in one of my books recently. I wrote a chapter on this, and it was almost like a giver's guilt. Like they felt guilty that they were doing something that I was not doing. And it was almost as if it was making them question themselves in ways that were very uncomfortable. And in order to be around me, just sitting at the dinner table, reading my book, they had to ask themselves if what they were doing was actually necessary, because they were witnessing me not doing something for days at a time while they were doing something for days at a time. And they thought that if you didn't do this something, you die, right? Like, that's it, game over. So since clearly the game is still going, right? Jerome is still showing, the game is still going. He's out there walking on the highway reading his book. I pass by him every day. What's going on? So they would offer me things just to tempt me, just to try and see if they could tempt me. They'd be like cooking something in the kitchen. You sure? You sure you don't? You sure you can't have this? I feel so bad eating this in front of you. You sure? And I would just tell them like, hey, I can have whatever I want. You know, it's a choice. I'm choosing not to. Right? So it was very interesting, the dynamic that I would run into with people who were just very, very perplexed. They were like, this is not natural. This is abnormal. You need to eat, right? So now I'm comfortable being around that setting, and the way that I do it is I don't say anything. I don't try to interrupt them eating. I don't try to tell them not to eat. I don't tell them anything. I just live my life. And live and let live, right? They say love is an acronym. Love stands for letting others voluntarily evolve. Right? That's love. So they don't have to change if they don't want to, right? It's a feeling state, and they're enjoying their feeling state, so I'm enjoying my feeling state. That's how I rationalize. Having said all of that about the friends and family having so much fun eating, drinking, and making you feel such a fool for missing out on all the fun, food and drink, and come to thin, I think that teasing and ridiculing may go a long way towards slipping up on certain things for most people. But anyway, my victory comes when it's all at an end, when everybody's mind is wrecked and the bellies are bulging, but yet it is still considered to be normal and to be wrecked and unable to keep your trousers zipped up because your waistline is expanded so much. Even though people will justify what they do, the proof is always in the pudding. As long as people continue to do what they do, they will always continue to age prematurely, suffer from low vitality, illness, and disease. And that's where I reign supreme, because people always think I'm half my age, and I've not been sick for years. But sadly, I had to go through hell and high water to get here. And for many, that's just too much work. So we can go ahead and stop right there. I think that was a nice little reading. That was a nice little eating. I feel full on that. I feel like that was a nice place marker to stop. And thank you for listening. Thank you so much for being here. Much love to you, my friend. I appreciate your presence. If you were here live, you can comment live. If you're here on the replay, you can comment replay. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. You know, keep the grateful, thankful spirit. These have just been a few more wisdoms of the ages from some of today's modern sages. Once again, this has been Jerome Shaw with the Pranic Pages.